Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the EvoPodcast, a podcast where we discuss all things to do with VCE, study habits, and high performance. I'm Dulitha, the head bio tutor at Evo Academics.
And I'm Sachin, head of chemistry at Evo.
Now, the focus of today's podcast, it's a really important topic. It's about how to find your why, how to find your purpose.
We've spoken on previous episodes about why having purpose is so much better than motivation alone, and it's a problem that all students struggle with. In today's episode, we're going to be covering why borrowing your purpose from someone else is a trap to avoid, how defining your goals by processes versus outcomes can have a significant impact, and also what to do if you don't know what your why is, and how eliminating things from your why can often be a good place to start.
Okay, so that leads us into our very first point of discussion for today's podcast, which is a crucial topic and point to cover before we establish anything else. And that's what a lot of students find themselves facing during their journey in VCE, which is having what we were calling before a borrowed why. Now, what exactly is a borrowed why? To flesh out that idea a bit more, a borrowed why is essentially a purpose that you haven't thought of yourself, you haven't decided for yourself. It's more so something that's been placed upon you by someone else, something else, right? And this is a situation lots of students find themselves in. So it might be the expectations of their parents, it might be the expectations of their teachers, other members of their family, the culture that they're raised in. So all those other factors end up making the student feel like I have to pursue this path simply because that's what's expected of me, not because that's what I want to do. Now, the issue with this, or the limitation of this, is that VCE is undoubtedly quite a long journey to go through, right? There's going to be lots of high moments, and similarly, there's going to be lots of low moments as well. For students who feel like their journey is forced upon them, during those low moments, they'll feel even lower, right? Because they have the sensation that I haven't decided this for myself, so they don't have really that drive, that purpose to get them through those tricky periods of time. Now, if you compare this to someone who has that intrinsic motivation, someone who knows, okay, this is the goal that I'm pursuing and I want this for me, not for anyone else. During those difficult periods of time, they're able to use that as fuel to get them through and get them to those high moments once again. Now, with these goals and expectations placed upon students, I'm not making a blanket call saying that all those goals are wrong and that you shouldn't follow them, anything like that. Because I know from my own experience when I was in high school and also from the students that I teach, lots of them, for example, want to pursue medicine, right? So I'm not saying that, okay, you shouldn't pursue medicine at all because blah, blah, blah. I'm saying that if you do want to pursue medicine, you need to really think about it yourself and come to that decision yourself. Now, just to give a bit of context and to discuss my own thought process, what prompted me to pursue the path of medicine, it was quite a personal motivation, something very close to me and my family. And that was mainly through my younger brother and his own experiences with the health system. So he was born with a congenital heart defect, and throughout his life, he's had five to six open heart surgeries, right? So he had some when he was a baby, some when he was in primary school, and some more recently when he was in high school. Thankfully, he's doing fine now. That experience that we had as a family, where we got to see firsthand how the medical team really took care of him as a patient, and also took care of us as a family, right? And our own worries and our own concerns was really eye-opening, right? So these doctors, these surgeons were undoubtedly in a very stressful environment, right? Because he's a baby, he was just born, he was premature, he's tiny, right? And having to do open heart surgery on a human being that is that small is going to be very scary. You don't know how it's going to turn out. It could turn out well and you get a positive outcome. It could go completely the other way as well. So these surgeons, the medical team as a whole, have a crazy amount of self-control and ability to handle the stress, the pressure, and the expectations on them, and still deliver that great level of care and great level of support and great level of empathy to everyone they're dealing with. Now, when I was young, I couldn't really remember those things because I myself was like 3 years old when that happened. But more recently, I got to see that firsthand when my brother was in high school. And through seeing those experiences, I knew that I wanted to be in that position myself, right? Not because being a doctor has, I don't know, social prestige, or because of the title, because I want doctor in front of my name, or because, I don't know, any sort of financial reward. It was more so because I wanted to be that person who is able to maintain that composure during those high pressure environments, and to be the person who can support more families through those tumultuous times that they may be going through. So that's just as a bit of context. And I knew that when I was in BCE, and that allowed me to have that sort of constant purpose and constant drive throughout the year, even when things were really stressful. My SACs were coming up. There's all this work that I've got to do. That was always a constant factor that I could always go back to and realize, okay, this is why I'm doing this, so this is worth it. Whereas, like I mentioned before, a student who may not have that intrinsic desire, but instead it's someone else just saying, oh, you got to go down the pathway of medicine, they don't really have that same driving force. Now, that being said, the really important thing is, if you do want to do something like medicine or any university course at the end of the day, the important thing to realize is that this is going to be your future job, right? Whatever you're pursuing is going to be your career. And you want to make sure that whatever career that you decide, you get it right, because that's what you'll be doing every day for quite a significant portion of your life, right? So you want to make sure whatever you decide is something that you can be content with, you can be fulfilled by doing as well, right? Now, in order to do this, you really need to understand what are the day-to-day tasks that are involved with this career, right? Not just the things that you see being hyped up. What does, let's say, what does a doctor do day to day? And after you've thought about that, also think about what's the journey like getting there, right? To be a doctor, you got to go through medical school, right? Medical school is quite challenging, that's known. And there are certain things that you will need to sacrifice in order to achieve that. So you've got to think, am I willing to do all those things? Am I willing to sacrifice all that because I want to get to that end goal, right? You can't just teleport straight to being a doctor and skip the whole journey.
If only it were that simple.
You've got to go through the motions, you've got to go through those sacrifices, and it's going to be hard, right? We're very early on in our medical career right now. It hasn't even started technically. And the future is undoubtedly going to be a lot more stressful and a lot harder than it is right now. Because as medical students, we don't really have much responsibility. But once we start working, of course, we have that burden of responsibility. We have someone's lives in our hands. And that's undoubtedly going to be very challenging. So those are important things to consider before making the decision. So all that being said, the key thing to realize for students tuning in is think about what your purpose is, what are you aiming towards, and make sure that whatever you decide is something that you've decided for yourself, and it's not something that someone else has forced upon you.
The key things I took away from what you were talking, Dulitha, was number one, it almost seems like we compare ourselves to others because that's easy to do, right? It's easy to see what other people have. It's easy to measure and therefore compare ourselves. But what we often miss is what we can't compare, like things like satisfaction. You have a personal drive for medicine that I personally don't have. Like medicine was very academic for me, right? It was an academic interest. It was a chance to do something my friends were doing. I only really discovered I would like medicine as a career in year 3. Prior to that, it was never like, I want to be a doctor. It was more, I was just interested in what I was learning, but I never thought about doing it as a job. So I think the key thing is like not comparing yourself to others. For me, it was an academic interest until that point. For you, it was really personal, and that's okay. And I think that's the way it should be. And secondly, it sounds like you also spend some time actually deliberately trying to find your why. Like for you, perhaps it may have been more personal and therefore it evolved over time. But for me, I know that I've had to often deliberately sit down and write down what it is that I value. Because when you don't have a personal experience like that, you don't just come up with the answer straight away. It actually requires thought. And I've been doing this actually over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. I've actually been periodically sitting down and I have a list where I write down, what do I enjoy? What energizes me? And what takes away from that? And I keep revising it because I think it needs deliberate practice to figure out what your why is. And then finally, on that point, I've also begun to become very careful about why it is that I want something. You said earlier that, you didn't become a doctor for the prestige or for the social status of it. I think a lot of people implicitly actually want that, right? So it's very important, at least in my eyes, that whenever I want something, I ask myself, do I actually want this? Do I want the pressure? Do I want, the mundane tasks associated with this? Or do I want something attached to this? For example, will people respect me or admire me more if I have this? And that second point is very dangerous because that means that you're not actually wedded to the thing that you enjoy or the passion, you're wedded to what it gets. And that's not sustainable long term.
Agreed.
So overall, I think we can see that through our differences in, pursuing medicine as an example, we can see how important it is to have your own purpose because very rarely can you steal it off someone else.
100%.
Another thing that I wanted to chat about was something I've also noticed in the way that I communicate with my chem students, particularly at the start of the year. And that's when we set these goals for ourselves, obviously that comes with a purpose and a reason why. But I found it's often easier to pursue a purpose that's driven by processes as opposed to outcomes. Now, I'll give a couple of examples that relate to school, but also how it can just apply to anyone at any stage of life. So for example, at the start of the year, a lot of students are after a high ATAR, right? They want 99 plus. They want, some students even take it to an extreme. They want a 99.9, 99.95.
Hopefully not 100.
Yeah, hopefully not. Hopefully not. They'll be sorely disappointed. But study scores of 50, right? I get students coming and I appreciate the lofty goals, right? Great, think big. But also recognize that outcomes are binary. So for example, if someone came in wanting an ATAR of 99 plus and they end up with a 98.95, in my eyes, you failed because your goal was binary. It was a 99 plus and that didn't eventuate. If you wanted a raw 50, that means even if you get a 49, you've technically failed. And there's an absurdity around that, right? Yeah. So this is the problem with binary goals, which is the chance of success is grossly minimized because you restrict yourself to one goal. What I found very useful for me and what gives me endurance in pursuing a goal that's supposedly hard is focusing on inputs rather than outputs. So for example, in order to achieve a 99.9 ATAR or whatever the lofty goal is, what type of behaviors would a person need to do? Well, they would need to learn from their mistakes and not make the same mistake twice. They would need to not feel embarrassed when asking questions that they're not sure of. They would need to repeatedly show up and work hard even when they feel confident or even when they feel anxious about doing it. And when I break down those big goals into these inputs, it all of a sudden seems so much more achievable. Because I don't know, how do students know what to do to get a 99.9 ATAR? How do students know what to do to get a study score? But it is easy to learn from your mistakes. It is easy to know to plan and consistently put in effort. So focusing on inputs, I find, is a much more sustainable form of pursuing a why.
Yeah, so Sachin, that structure that you just spoke about, inputs versus outputs, I'm sure lots of students would find that really useful in terms of rationalizing their goals into something actually tangible so they can pursue them. Now, we've spoken a lot about purpose and why. What if a student doesn't have a why? What comes next? What do they do?
I mean, it's a good question, right? Like we're talking about this purpose building. The point is, for most of our lives, or at least when we're starting out, it's very difficult to find purpose. So what should we do? What works for me is often, rather than sitting and waiting for this purpose or this why to somehow emerge, I just like to get cracking. So I like to experiment and I like to try new things and see how they work. Now, one of the things that I've thought about is if we don't know what our purpose is, we should just work. see what ends up happening. So then I often tell my students this, and sometimes, in the middle of the year, you're working really hard, you're not getting the results. How do you keep going when you're not getting a result? One idea that really works for me is this idea of equilibrium. So if we try and sort of don't take any control, don't try anything, say it's too hard, what happens is things will start happening to us and we lose control. Think about our attention as an easy example. If we're not clear with focusing our attention, we have so many screens that show up our time. We have social media. We have a lot of things that will easily consume our attention, but not in the way that we want. So I see working towards a goal, even if you're not clear of your purpose, as a way to resist that equilibrium. Secondly, I always like to think in terms of regret minimization. I think people have a fair idea of what they value and what they don't. They may not have a fully fledged purpose, but I think people fairly know what they find enjoyable and what they don't. So I always think, what would I look back on and regret either doing or not doing? And I think that's a particularly important thing to focus on. A lot of people will focus on regretting what they do, right? So for example, if someone has an idea to try something new or a new hobby and they suck at it, they'll be like, oh my God, why did I try this? I regret that so much. I embarrassed myself. Yeah. I think what a lot of people don't think about is opportunity cost. What are some missed opportunities or regrets that you have about not taking action? For example, if your friends were doing a new hobby, but you said, nah, that's not for me because you felt embarrassed to do it, you've potentially missed out on a hobby that you could have very well enjoyed. The opportunity cost of that is huge. Likewise, if students are, attempting a subject or trying to pursue a score that seems out of reach, sure, it would be easy not to act, and that way you can't fail, but also you've taken a decision not to pursue that further and see what would eventuate. And so often we regret the actions that we've done, but we don't think enough about the actions that we haven't done out of fear. And that's what I often tell myself when I feel scared or when I feel anxious about doing something. I go, well, what's the worst that could happen? If I don't try, I've already failed. The outcome is sealed. But if I try, I could make it work. And so that's a method I've found useful in terms of if we don't have a why or don't have a purpose, just keep trying new things and then see if something resonates and hopefully becomes a purpose you can use going forward.
Yeah, so from that point, it seems like the key thing that students need to take away is really not closing any doors prematurely if they're not sure, and trying out as wide of a range of things as possible so that they can then close some doors after knowing that it's not for them. Now, this sort of leads on to our next point, which is about closing those doors, right? When do you know to say, this is not for me?
I think what's really important is everyone always focuses on their purpose and what they want to do. The reason why I've been thinking about this a lot is about New Year's resolutions, right? A lot of people say, I want to do these 3 things, right? Most people have some sort of goal that revolves around exercise. Most people have some sort of goal that relates to work or study. And they just keep adding things like, I want to do this. The question is, that obviously takes time. Where's that time going to come from? It clearly has to come from somewhere else, which means in order to achieve certain things, we have to give other things up. And that's why I was thinking of this idea of why having a strong why and purpose actually means having a defined no to lots of other things in life. I'll give you an example for me, and then hopefully you can share what are some things that you've possibly said no to in the past. So starting off at uni, or honestly even going back to VCE, I was heavily involved in lots of extracurricular activities. I enjoyed being part of the stage band. I enjoyed playing extracurricular sport as part of my school. And I was also taking part in lots of musical programs outside of school. So I enjoyed that novelty. Now, of course, I needed to study on the side too. So the question became then, well, if I want all of these things, what am I going to have to give up? One of the things that I was happy to give up was TV shows, right? I'm not a big TV show watcher. A lot of my friends would talk about TV shows they were watching, and honestly, I felt a little bit left out sometimes. But the truth is, it didn't really mean all that much to me. I didn't care for it. It doesn't interest me. Likewise, another thing is, people would, I knew that I had a couple of friends who would always hang out at the local park after school. And I would love to join them, right? But I could only join like maybe once a week. But these guys would go there like every single day after school. So then I would be like, I would resent the fact that, I couldn't join them. But then I would go, well, hang on, I'm making a trade-off here. I enjoy the novelty of all the extracurriculars I'm doing. And so the price of that is not being able to hang out with my friends every day after school. You make a choice. So in order to have a strong sense of purpose, we need to often say no to other things. I've begun to realize that more in uni, right? As we go more senior in our university studies, I'm quickly realizing it's important to cut things off. I enjoy playing guitar, as I said earlier with music. I don't get as much time to play guitar anymore. And that's okay, because the demand of my purpose towards becoming more involved in medicine and studying it more has increased. And that's a trade I'm willing to make. Likewise, I've reduced my social media usage and actually cut off Instagram at the moment. Is that something I had to do in year 1, 2, and 3? Not really. I didn't think about it twice. But now, in order to achieve other goals I want, that's something that has to give way. What are some examples of things that you've closed the door to in order to pursue like your passion of med or any other goal that you set for yourself?
Yeah, I might start in BC as well. And for me, it was very similar as to what you experienced with TV shows. So in year 7 to year 10, I would be just binging TV shows on repeat because there's no real demand for me to be studying all the time. The pressure's quite low, tons of time available. But I realized quickly that this habit wouldn't be very sustainable in terms of the time that it took out of my day. So that was sort of the first thing to go, cut out TV shows. And I haven't watched any TV shows even to this day, right? So since year 11, year 12 to now, I haven't fully completed a TV show. The only exception, I would say there are a couple of exceptions to that. It's only if we go over to like someone's place or someone comes over to our place and something's playing, of course I'm going to watch it. But I'm not just in bed rotting away watching TV shows. So that was one example. Another example would be gaming. So I've always been a gamer since my youth. My dad got me onto Age of Empires 2 at a very early age. That was a game that he played himself.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a vintage game. Have you played it?
No, I haven't.
You should take a look. It's about like civilization and you control like a army, but whatever. That's not relevant. So I gamed a lot in year 11, especially. Played quite a lot of Valorant. That was a big game back then. But in year 11, it did eat into my time because I was balancing that with VCE, of course. But I decided that when year 12 was coming around, with the UCAT being added into the mix as well, that video gaming would not be sustainable. So that wasn't a sacrifice that I just made myself. Like my entire friend group, so all the guys who got together to play, we were like, okay, let's stop gaming for this year, and then we recommenced after after exams were over. But yeah, nowadays since like year 3 of med school, yeah, that's when things started ramping up a bit. I haven't been playing video games. The other guys do still hop on time every now and then, but yeah, it's a sacrifice that had to be made because, like you said before, you can't do everything. You've got to say yes to some things and the things that are important to you. And some things, yes, they are important, but they may not hold that same level of importance. And those things sort of just fall by the wayside. And that's okay. Life goes on.
I think, again, we just need to pick what's important to us, prioritize that, and don't worry about what other people are doing because we don't know what's important to them.
Exactly.
So hopefully we've given you some guidance around how to find your why and how to approach setting goals for the year. It's one of those podcasts where hopefully we've given you more questions rather than answers to go back and have a think about on your own.
So keep an eye out on our YouTube and our Instagram for our upcoming episodes, and we'll catch you guys next time.